This is the last picture of David Lama, a legendary climber who conquered peaks all over the world, until one seemingly ordinary day when David and two others descended one of the toughest climbs in the Canadian Rockies. None of them made it out alive. Imagine the biting cold nipping at your face as you ascend the snow-covered mountain, each breath visible in the crisp, frigid air. The crunch of snow beneath your boots and the clinking of your climbing gear create a rhythmic soundtrack to your difficult journey. As you climb higher, the wind intensifies, whipping through your layers of clothing and chilling you to the bone. Your muscles burn with each step, and your lungs ache as they work overtime to supply your body with the oxygen it craves in the thinning mountain air. The snowy landscape stretches out before you, a blank canvas interrupted only by the jagged peaks piercing the sky. The higher you climb, the more treacherous the terrain becomes, with icy patches and deep snow threatening to throw you off balance. But the thrill of conquering a challenging route, the satisfaction of pushing your body and mind to new heights, these are the rewards that draw climbers like David Lama to the raw and unforgiving mountains. David Lama was to climbing what Mozart was to classical music. Born on the 4th of August, 1990, as a youngster, he proved that he was a child prodigy on the canvas of cliff faces. Austrian mountaineer and Himalaya veteran Peter Habeler spotted Lama's unique talent at just 5 years old. Peter had organized a climbing camp, and Lama's climbing ability blew him away. If you haven't heard the name of Peter Habeler, he is a legend in the world of climbing, being one of the first people, alongside Reinhold Messner, to summit Mount Everest without the use of oxygen. So his opinions certainly counted. After the climbing camp, Peter immediately called Lama's parents to tell them their boy had an unusual talent. "David was incredible," says Habeler. "No fear, fantastic balance." And so, this started Lama's climbing journey at the unbelievably young age of 5 years old. Soon after, Lama began training with another climbing legend, Reinhold Scherer, a holder of 13 World Championship climbing medals, and creator of the most modern and innovative rock climbing centers in the world. This gave Lama a head start that would propel him into a prosperous future as a competition rock climber and then a master mountaineer who would go on to conquer mountains like the Cerro Torre in South America and the Lunag Ri in Nepal. David Lama came from icy beginnings in the Austrian town of Innsbruck, situated in the middle of the Alps. His climbing talent likely hailed from his father, Rinzi Lama, who was a Nepalese mountain guide. His mother, Claudia Vergleff, was an Austrian nurse from Innsbruck. The pair met when Claudia went trekking through Nepal and met Rinzi, who was working as a Sherpa guide at the time. Claudia said that she stayed 5 weeks in Nepal, and after he's coming to Austria with me, and we married in December. He was very charming. This match made in heaven, or rather the harsh cold of the Himalayas, would go on to create an absolute climbing legend, and this climbing legend was already competing in competitions by the age of 8 years old. In 1998, he competed in the Hohe Munde Cup in Telfs, Tyrol, placing second, even though he was much younger than the other competitors. He would only get better from here. In the year 2000, he climbed a route that was rated as a 5.13 in Slovenia, known as kindergarten. Don't let the name fool you. Lama was the youngest person to ever ascend a difficulty grading of this level. If you're not aware of how climbing grades work, a cliff face is rated from 5.0, going up to 5.15 on the most difficult end of the scale. This means that at just 10 years old, Lama was ascending elite-level climbs. In 2000, he also won another 6 climbing competitions, setting him apart from his older competitors. In 2002, Lama won every rock climbing competition he entered, including the prestigious Rock Master Junior. Just 2 years later, he on-site ascended the 513 d'Avre Satanique route at the Gorge du Loup in France. An on-site ascension is one where a climber has no previous knowledge of a climb. This took out all planning and preparation that would normally go into an extremely hard climb, with David having to make decisions and essentially climb blind. But even at such a young age, David Lama showed an incredible creative ability to assess and navigate the route without any prior rehearsal. This same year, he also climbed the J.P. Chod route in the same location, which was his first ascent of a 514 grade climb. At 14 years of age, Lama was now old enough to compete in the European Youth Cup. He won this competition, as well as every other competition he entered that year. The following year would see Lama become a junior world champ for a second time. He moved on to senior competitions in 2006. However, at only 15 years old, the International Federation for Sport Climbing had to actually change their rules for Lama to be able to compete with those at his elite level, the seniors. He was now competing with people who had years more sport climbing experience than him, but this didn't slow him down. As a matter of fact, he even earned a sponsorship from Red Bull. He placed second in his first official World Cup competition and then went on to win the next one, becoming the youngest person to compete in a senior sport, climbing World Cup, and also the youngest to snatch up the first place title in both lead and bouldering in the first season. At this point, he probably started running out of room for all his trophies and awards. Lama became the European champion in 2007 for bouldering, and in 2008, he won the overall ranking in the World Cup. But in 2009, something shocked happened. Not only did he not win, he didn't even come in second. Uncharacteristically, David Lama placed third. You see, David was following in his father's footsteps, and his focus was shifting to a calling to be in the mountains. The year he took third in the World Cup, he set his sights on Cerro Torre in Patagonia and announced his intention to free climb up the compressor route, meaning he would use no gear except for rope and bolts to ensure his safety. No one had ever tried this before. Alpinist legend Reinhold Messner even called the undertaking crazy and impossible. This massive mountain is otherworldly in its beauty, but it is also brutal and unforgiving. So, Lama, along with fellow climber Daniel Steurer and a Red Bull film crew, set out to summit Cerro Torre. However, this first attempt was about to spark severe controversy and criticism from the entire mountaineering community. They unfortunately weren't able to make the summit due to weather. But even worse, the two climbers and the Red Bull crew left behind a significant amount of equipment on the mountain, including approximately 30 drilled bolts next to the already heavily bolted route. Additionally, 700 meters of fixed rope and 5 haul bags were abandoned along the route. Local Argentinian guides were hired to remove the equipment, but they were unable to retrieve all of it, and none of the bolts were removed. The backlash of having someone else clean up their mess and the outrage of adding even more bolts to the existing route was huge. If you're wondering why this was such a big deal to the climbing community, it's generally agreed that adding extra bolts to a climbing route can have multiple negative impacts, including environmental issues. Bolted routes can attract crowds, which can lead to garbage, human waste, and soil erosion. It can reduce wilderness experience, since bolts can be an unsightly intrusion in a natural landscape. They can also change how committed or difficult a route is, which changes how people experience it. Adding extra bolts can stop people from experiencing the mental game that is part of the climbing experience. Poor bolt placement can create unpleasant clips that break up the flow of the climb. For example, bolts placed far to the right or left of where the climber climbs can cause unnecessary rope drag. The ethics of retro-bolting a climb is definitely a hot topic in climbing, and David Lama felt the brunt of it from all the outrage. Lama was apologetic to the community, and later said that understanding and overcoming the controversy to me has been my biggest achievement. And I came from a world of rules and regulations and stepped into the world of alpinism, a world where it's all about the attitude you have towards a mountain. Back in 2009, I didn't have that attitude. If you are a sport climber, a bolt has no meaning. It's just protection. It's how you climb. It doesn't mean you are murdering the impossible. In the mountains, it really does murder the impossible. There is a big difference. I understand this now. Due to the bad weather and the bad reception of their attempt, the team had to abandon this climb completely for the 2009 and 2010 seasons. But this wasn't the end of the Cerro Torre climb for Lama. As you can see, Lama was known as someone with a humble nature who wanted to be outdoors. He felt that the strict rules of competition climbing put him in a box, constraining him from reaching his true greatness. According to him, climbing in the gym was always super fun, and I still enjoy it now, but I've always perceived climbing outdoors as the real climbing, the true climbing, the adventure. But in the competition world, you have all these rules and regulations. You must go there and do this, but you must not do that or that. Whereas outside, you have 100% freedom. It's only about your attitude, and you have to find your attitude. What I figured out for myself is that you have to stay true to your abilities. And Lama was a pioneer in sport climbing gyms, so what would stop him from being a pioneer on the harsh cliff faces of freezing mountains? In 2011, he officially retired from competition climbing so he could focus fully on mountaineering. And naturally, his heart was still set on free climbing the Cerro Torre compressor route. So, David once again set out to tackle the beautiful mountain with a Red Bull crew. Peter Ortner, a more experienced climber than Lama's previous partner, joined him. The second attempt started in January of 2011, but the team had to abort the climb as the head wall was full of ice and bad weather made the climb even more treacherous. A month later, on the 12th of February, Lama and Ortner attempted the climb once again. They had a small window of good weather that allowed them to finally reach the summit. Unfortunately, they had to use some aid techniques, taking away the long-awaited goal of being the first to free ascend to the peak. However, they used this opportunity to scout out a path to come back for their free ascent. It was a whole year later, in January of 2012, that Lama and Ortner attempted the free summit once more. This attempt also seemed doomed. Lama survived a big fall, but this didn't stop him. He immediately reattempted the section and finally managed to reach the summit without the use of any aid, except for the rope and bolts that were already on the wall. It seems it was a case of third time's the charm for the team. It took 24 hours in total, and the climbing duo slept in bivouac sacks below the ice towers and added no extra bolts to the climb. Would you be brave enough to sleep thousands of feet above the air on a freezing, cold mountain? This made Lama and Ortner the first to free climb up the compressor route on the Cerro Torre. Lama later said that this first free ascent of the southeast ridge of Cerro Torre is the end of probably the greatest adventure in my life so far. I'm especially proud having it done without adding any bolts. As it turns out, David Lama's journey to climb Lunag Ri 3 years later probably topped this adventure because of the wild story he walked away with. Lunag Ri is an immense mountain that stretches 22,621 feet into the skies and lies on the border between Nepal and Tibet. At the time, it was the highest unclimbed peak in the Himalayas. So, naturally, Lama wanted to be the first to get to the top. In 2015, Lama teamed up with American climber Conrad Anker to make history and become the first to reach the summit. They chose to ascend a rock crevice leading to the northwest pillar, planning to employ mixed climbing techniques as they reached the ridge. As night fell, they set up a bivouac beneath a large boulder, but they knew they were racing against time with bad weather approaching. The next day, unfavorable conditions, including a lack of ice and poor snow quality, hindered their progress and protection. Despite their best efforts, they couldn't reach the summit and were left with a tough decision: brave another night in potentially deadly temperatures and strong winds, or abandon the attempt. With heavy hearts, they chose to descend. This shows the humble nature of both climbers, with an attitude that giving up is not cowardly or even a failure. Sometimes you cannot best the hostility of nature. Undeterred, the pair returned for a second attempt the following year, on the 6th of November 2016, The weather was fair, and all had gone according to plan until they had reached the rock crevice at 20,000 feet, a mere 620 feet from the peak. Disaster struck when one of the most awful things imaginable happened. Conrad Anker suffered a heart attack. Lama had no choice but to give up on the climb. The pair slowly rappelled down the mountain, with Lama helping Anker as best as he could. The two climbers were forced to part ways, with an emergency rescue chopper taking Anker to a hospital, where he underwent a successful life-saving operation. After this climb and barely escaping death, Anker retired from high-altitude climbing. However, Lama did not give up. Alone at base camp, Lama faced a difficult choice. Should he continue the climb solo, or give up? Driven by determination and his passion for climbing, he decided to give it another shot. 2 days after helping Conrad Anker into a rescue chopper, David ascended the northwest ridge via a longer but easier rock crevice and set up camp. Since he had no climbing partner, he had to use roped solo techniques in order to ascend the ridge, climbing one pitch as led, setting up an anchor, and then rappelling back down to remove protections. But climbing the mountain this way, together with a heavy backpack, turned out to be too much of a challenge. Lama aborted this third attempt as well, not far from the location of the high point of the first expedition with Conrad Anker. In October 2018, Lama embarked on a fourth attempt, ascending the same ridge he had tackled in his first solo endeavor. The weather was unforgiving, with freezing temperatures and fierce winds battering his tent as he bivouacked for 2 nights. Yet Lama persevered, pushing through the pain of frostbitten toes to finally reach the summit on the 3rd day. After a brief moment of triumph at the summit, Lama knew he had to descend quickly. He rappelled down the mountain, finally reaching base camp at midnight. Miraculously, despite the frostbite, he didn't lose any of his toes. David Lama's relentless determination, unwavering spirit, and incredible resilience led him to become the first person to conquer the majestic Lunag Ri. David Lama proved that sometimes you can best nature, but other times Mother Nature has different plans in store for us. According to Lama, I think climbers and mountaineers have a very open relationship toward risk and toward their fears. We really think about what can go wrong. Obviously, it's really important to stay alive, but I also think it'd be really good if people in general think about the consequences of their actions as much as climbers do. It was April of 2019 when David Lama would face his final moments in the mountains he loved. On the morning of April 18, 2019, Hadley Hammer received a devastating phone call. Hadley Hammer is a professional skier from Jackson, Wyoming. She had been dating David for 5 months, and they had planned a whole life together. But this all came to a tragic halt. David Lama, alongside climbers Hans-Jörg Auer and Jess Roskelley, ascended an extremely tough climb up Howes Peak in the Canadian Rockies. This was the last mountain they would ever ascend. Using pictures and GPS data, Jess Roskelley's father, John, was able to piece together the terrifying events that unfolded that day. Photographs from Roskelley's phone indicate that the 3 climbers reached the summit on Tuesday, 16th April at 12:44 p.m. Everything indicates that the 3 intended to descend using the same route they came up, which included some abseiling and skiing. You might know the term abseiling better as rappelling, the controlled descent of a steep slope, like as a rock face or mountain by moving down a rope. Shortly after Jess took a photo of their summit ascent, the 3 began their descent. Hans-Jörg took a few more photos as they descended the ridge, documenting their progress with each abseil. At 1:27 p.m., he snapped the last picture found on one of their 3 cameras. The image captured David standing at the base of their final abseil from the southwest ridge, poised at the entrance to the snow channel they had climbed earlier. In the lower right corner, the ridge edge was visible, marked by the tracks of their ascent. With the ropes coiled, the 3 climbers hurried across the softened snow flank towards the crossing that would lead them out of the funnel-shaped hollow above the exit of their route. Life by the drop. They had already navigated these moderately steep snow flanks without ropes during their ascent. From the southwest ridge, it was a 541-foot descent to the lower end of the snow channel, and a traverse to the next channel above the King Line, which would require more rappelling. Jess took charge of the ropes, meticulously tying another sack-stitch knot at the center mark on both strands, creating 2 loops about 20 inches long. He slipped his arm through the loops, tossed them over his neck, and unfurled the 4 strands of rope. He tied a normal-sized sack-stitch into a loop of the green and blue rope and secured it with a carabiner to the shaft end of one of his ice axes. This knot was about 6 feet from the central double loop around his shoulders. But as they descended under the early afternoon sun, disaster struck the climbing trio. A slab of snow suddenly broke away before they could leave the channel towards the King Line. Most likely, they heard the slope crack, turned, and braced for the oncoming avalanche. The broken shaft of one of Jess's ice axes and a bent carabiner found later indicated that Jess managed to hammer his ice axe into the ice with significant force just before the avalanche struck, trying to anchor and brace against the oncoming fury. A photograph taken from Icefields Parkway immediately after the event showed that a large cornice broke off above their route. A cornice is a ledge or shelf of snow that overhangs a mountain, usually on the leeward side of a ridge or crest. Cornices form when wind drifts snow over sharp terrain breaks, where it collects and grows. They can grow several meters out from the edge of the mountain as the winter season progresses, molding and folding into beautiful shapes. No matter how much knowledge and expertise you have as a climber in the mountains, and no matter how much skill and preparation you have around avalanche prevention and areas to avoid, you unfortunately can't plan for issues with cornices dropping into snow above you and triggering a downslope avalanche. And this avalanche overwhelmed them like a freight train. After a 19-foot fall, the rope tightened between the ice axe and the loops around Jess's shoulders, exerting the full force of the avalanche on the knots and breaking the shaft end of the ice axe. The knots were later found to be pulled as tightly as if welded together. It's almost certain that both David and Hans-Jörg also tried to secure themselves with their ice tools, but they weren't connected to them. Neither David nor Hans-Jörg used hand straps during this climb. While both of Jess's ice tools were found, neither of David's were recovered, and only one of Hans-Jörg's was found. When the bodies were finally recovered, it was found Jess had 2 ropes tightly wrapped around his torso and legs. Hans-Jörg didn't seem to have a rope on his body, while Lama was entangled in some loops. All 3 climbers were swept down into the snow basin and through the life-by-the-drop route. It took 5 days for search teams to find their bodies buried in the mountain's embrace. A portion of David Lama's ashes was carried to the summit of Fox Peak in Nepal, a place where he used to acclimatize for his attempts on Lunag Ri. His parents, accompanied by close friends and relatives, embarked on a heartfelt journey deep into the Solu-Khumbu region. There they built a chorten, creating a final resting place for David in a landscape that had been so significant to him. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay bold and live brave.